So, yeah, so today I am very pleased to be able to talk to you about the research that I did. And my research was, well, my thesis was entitled "It's Ruined Me Being a Mother," which was a quote from one of my participants. And it was focused on mothers' experiences of abuse by their now adult children. And the key is really in that word now, because I started out very much from a domestic abuse framework in order to look at this issue of abuse by adult children, which was a hugely under research area at the time, and still remains somewhat under research, although there has been definitely, a bit more research and data gathered on this subject. But then, of course, just in relation to what Jane was saying, is that what we found is that the abuse had begun, before the children were adults, and certainly was going to continue for some time, at least after, the interviews finished and after I, wrapped up my thesis, really. So yes, so I think that is something that I'm going to talk about quite a bit in this as part of this presentation, and something that I really think we, services and agencies and the whole system could do better in terms of providing the support to these parents. Now, another disclaimer is that even though I didn't set out to be to be specifically looking at the experiences of mothers, all my participants ended up being mothers. They were people who had contacted me, having learned about my research, or had been referred to me by specialist support services, or by other gatekeepers. And yes, it just so happened that they were all mothers. So I think that brought a very different dimension to some of their experiences, something which I did really talk about in my research. So let me see. Hopefully, hold on. Why can't I move? Oh yeah, okay, I can. So yeah, so the first thing for me, really, when we talk about this issue of adult child to parent abuse, as it's called, for lack of a sort of a better word, even though it's still pretty lengthy, is that it is very much an invisible problem. And what by invisible, even though, we are talking about it more, even though we are trying to get more data and there is a bit more research being done on the subject, this type of abuse still remains quite invisible because of the different legislative, legal and service provision frameworks, that exist, that surround it. And so we know that, domestic abuse, even though domestic abuse technically covers anyone that is personally connected, and therefore covers the abuse of family members and of parents by their children, the focus of the domestic abuse sector of abuse field is very much on intimate partners, both in research and in practice, right? So we have decades and decades of research into intimate partner violence and abuse that have really helped inform, the development of guidance, practice, tools, and services in England and Wales, and in other sort of Western countries. And we definitely understand a lot more now about intimate partner violence and abuse than we did years ago. But we certainly understand it much better than than adult child to parent abuse, just because we don't really talk about it so much when we talk about domestic abuse. And in fact, when domestic abuse first started as a field of research and activism in the 1960s and 70s in the West. Well, in the UK and the US, it was intimate partner violence that was the issue, really. So there's that focus on intimate partners within domestic abuse, which then leads to the sort of invisibility or invisibilization, so to speak, of adult child to parent abuse. Then we come to the field of child to parent abuse. And, you know, this is where CAPVA is the expert. So I'm not going to talk to you more, you know, too much about that. But we know that traditionally the focus of this field, of this sector, is on children and adolescents, right? So, you know, the existence of adult children has been completely absent, really, as an area of focus. And so again, that's where, you know, parents that experience abuse from their adult children fall through the gap because the terminology doesn't fit, you know, what they are experiencing, and also the service provision that is available is not also there. And then we also have the field of elder abuse, which, you know, will be relevant to a lot of the parents who experience abuse from their adult children, because we know that the majority of perpetrators of elder abuse are adult children. So, you know, so that is something that the elder abuse research or literature has shown us. But again, there, as the name suggests, the focus of this field, both in terms of literature, in terms of research, and in terms of, you know, service provision, is on older people, and not so much on, you know, parents. And sort of in connection to this, we also have the area of safeguarding adults, which, you know, has very much existed in silo against domestic abuse. And so, yeah, so we have all these different areas of focus, which do not really shed light and which do not really take into account the specific experiences of this cohort of, you know, this group of people, parents who are experiencing abuse from their adult children. And the reason why, you know, I say this is because, and I think this is really the reason why I ended up doing this PhD, is I started my professional life in London for more than 13 years ago now as an ITVA. And as an ITVA, you know, well, I worked for a women-only service. So as an ITVA, I would support women. And some of the women that I supported would be mothers experiencing abuse from their adult children, primarily sons. So, you know, so that was definitely something that we noticed. And it was very different. So I remember feeling like really ill-equipped, you know, when I worked with these mothers, the dash which we had to use, you know, with all survivors was not fit for purpose. And a lot of these survivors lots of these mothers would score low on the, you know, on the actuarial dash risk assessment. You know, a lot of the questions did not really match their realities, and they also took much longer to engage, and, you know, and they require longer. And I think as an ITVA service, which was really, you know, focused on crisis intervention, risk reduction, that was just not a model that worked. And I still remember very vividly a client, well, you know, we call them clients. So a client of mine that I had to, you know, whose case I had to keep open much longer than would have been considered good practice for an ITVA service. And I just had to keep her case open because her situation was, ongoing. And what she needed really was just somebody to be there in case things changed. And I think that's just not how we worked. And I don't think that's how we still work, as ITVA services. So yes, and I think years later, after I moved on from my frontline work into standing together, into more operational and strategic roles, I still remembered, that experience of working with that particular mother and feeling a lot of helplessness, and feeling like maybe, she needed a really different kind of service. So I think, the domestic abuse field, even though it does cater for, parents of adult children who are abusive, doesn't really always respond to their needs. And I think these, like these sort of separations and gaps between these different fields have led to what, Hannah Bowles, researcher, calls dichotomies and, dichotomies and disjoints, between all these different fields and different areas and different foci, and that was really what ultimately led me to this topic, because when in my work with Standing Together, I then started being involved in domestic homicide reviews, and we had a lot of, where we had quite a lot of analysis done around the differences in dynamics, in risk factors between intimate partner homicides and adult family homicides. And I think, the conversations that I had at that level at Standing Together, like, really reinforced my desire to look a little bit, more in detail into this area. And so when the studentship opportunity came up, I just thought, well, this is a sign, really. So in terms of what we know about, about data, about the prevalence and about the scale of the problem, well, it will come as no surprise, really, that we have very limited or even unavailable data. Although, again, we have a bit more data available now, thanks to different bits and pieces of research and good practice that that we have. The source to go to for prevalence data on domestic abuse in England and Wales is the crime survey in England and Wales, but there you only have a breakdown between partner abuse and family abuse, and it doesn't go any further. So we don't really, know which of the family abuse is by adult children. We rely on, local police data, and there's been some research, there's some really interesting research that has been done based on the police data, which, does show the number, or maybe the percentage of cases of domestic abuse that are perpetrated by family members, and then within that by adult children. But there, we also have the problem of relying on reported, right, domestic abuse data. And we know how, we know the problem of underreporting in domestic abuse in general, but really we can quite confidently say that parents experiencing abuse from their children will be even less likely to report to the police. So, so this data is really useful, but it doesn't tell us the whole picture. We do have Home Office Homicide Index, which will give us a breakdown of homicide perpetrated by adult children, well, by children, basically. but but again, this is homicide. We're talking about homicide, which is really a very severe, a very extreme end of the spectrum, and a lot of the ongoing experiences, daily experiences of abuse will not be captured in that. But there is data available there from a sort of a national perspective. And linked to this, although, I mean, they're quite separate things, but since COVID 2020, well, since May 2020, after the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the Domestic Homicide Project, which is based within the VKPP, which is Vulnerability, Knowledge, Policing Practice Project, has been collecting data on domestic homicides and unexplained deaths, as well as suspected victim suicides. And it is from all 43 police forces in England and Wales. And it is a project that is quite really beneficial in terms of insights, because, whereas the Home Office Homicide Index will just give you the numbers, this project will analyze the data and will really look at the different risk factors that have been indicated by the police upon returning the data to the project, to see what common themes can emerge from these different cases. And I was part of this project before I actually moved back to Vietnam, and I was involved in some of the work analyzing specifically adult family homicides. And there again, the data is not surprising. The vast majority of these cases are perpetrated by adult children, also primarily adult sons. And some of the themes, some of the findings that came out from these cases in terms of risk factors, in terms of, factors that are present at the time of the homicide, are quite, consistent with the data, that the findings from domestic homicide reviews and research based on, domestic homicide reviews, mental health needs, substance misuse issues, care, the care dynamics between the victims and the perpetrators, lack of contact with agencies, etc. Okay, so so these are all common themes that really this project has identified from its work. So the difference between the domestic homicide project data and domestic homicide reviews is that the project collects this data directly from the police at the point very shortly after the homicide occurs and has been identified in the local area. And so a lot of the information that it gathers is based on the knowledge that the police have of these cases at the time of the homicide. And the police do have a lot of knowledge, actually, a lot of information, but obviously it will not be in any way as complete, as comprehensive as what a domestic homicide review will later on uncover and discuss and analyze, etc. But the advantage of this data is that it is directly from the police, and there is a lot of, and this is a project that is led by the College of the Policing and the NPCC. So there is a huge buy-in by all police forces. So they do, provide data very consistently. Whereas with domestic homicide reviews, again, we have to rely on local authorities to publish the data, etc. Although the National Repository of Domestic Homicide Reviews could be a really good way to solving this problem. And there, once again, is about domestic homicides. It's about these really extreme cases of abuse, maybe, but of perhaps other different circumstances that may or may not really explain some of the daily realities of the parents before these tragic incidents occur. We also have some data that has been gathered, and a lot of research and a lot of user insights that have been gathered from older people, and this is based on services that have been set up specifically to support older people experiencing domestic abuse. And there we also know that when it comes to older people experiencing domestic abuse, perhaps the perpetrator is not so commonly an intimate partner as it is an adult child. But again, it's not very systematic, and it's not data that is available nationally. And we also have specialist service data, from services like CAPVA, from services like PEGS, who support specifically parents who experience abuse from their children. And insights from these parents have been really, really beneficial. And I have no doubt that some of you, or most of you, will have heard of a research project conducted by AVA, well, formerly AVA, specifically into the experiences of mothers of abuse by their adult children. So we do have, I guess, a lot more, perhaps a lot more appetite and a lot more demand for understanding better this phenomenon. So, again, that leads into my research, which try to explore experiences of mothers who had been or who were being abused by their now adult children. And what I wanted to understand by speaking to these mothers was, what the dynamics of abuse were, right? So from their, from mothers' stories of what they experienced, could there be some quite different, some very distinct, some very specific dynamics of abuse, that these mothers were going through? Which factors, I wanted to know what influenced mothers' help-seeking journey, their decision to seek help, what kind of help they sought, and what their experience of access to support was like. And this included any additional barriers that they might have experienced if they did seek help, and what they thought effective support looked like, what effective support looked like for them. But also I was very interested in how mothers made sense of the abuse and the relationships that they had between, with their children as a result of that abuse. So I was really, really interested in the narratives, in the stories that these mothers had to tell. Because at the beginning, I started with all these dichotomies and disjoints between these different fields. I really wanted to get mothers to talk about their lives and about the life stories of their relationship and the abuse that they might have experienced along the way, within that relationship, within their life course, really, without giving them any cut-off point, so to speak. And so because of that, even though I started from a domestic abuse framework of, children aged 16 or over, I wanted mothers to tell me the stories of their relationship with their children from the beginning, as they wished. And that was when we realized that there was a lot of abuse going on, really, even before, the children reached 16, certainly after the children, reach the age of 18, when they would be considered an adult by law, right? And so, yes, this is the context that I started in, these dichotomies and disjoints between child-to-parent abuse, between domestic abuse, and between elder abuse. What I learned from listening to the mothers who took part in the project was that, on the one hand, the experiences of these mothers were really a contradiction, of those dichotomies and disjoints, because what they told me and what they told me from their stories is that there was no cut off, there was no separation, there was no division between what we professionals would call child to parent abuse or domestic abuse or elder abuse. Because of the blurring lines between the age of the children and the age of the mothers. So here I'm going to show you a quote from one of the participants, and obviously these are pseudonyms that that were chosen for the project. So this is what a mother told me. She said, "It's just always been like that all the way along, all the way along." And her son was 17 at the time of the interview, which was, in 2019. So he would be what? A few years older now. And he would definitely be an adult now, considered an adult. And what she said is that it had just always been like that all the way along. And later on, she said, "Well, I've got elder abuse to look forward to, I'm confidently expecting that one." And Mercy, the mother who said this, laughed a lot, when she was saying this, because for her it was just it had never stopped. It had started a long time ago. It was continuing, and it wasn't going to stop anytime soon. And so I think that was just a really interesting quote, because it sort of illustrates, this non-ending experience, non-dividing experience that these mothers had of the abuse of their children, that really defies, these quite, I would think, quite superficial divisions that we have when we call something child to parent abuse or domestic abuse or elder abuse. On the other hand, at the same time, what these mothers told me also confirmed, unfortunately, these dichotomies and disjoints that we know exist between all these different areas, because they were really a neglected group of victims who fall through numerous gaps. They fall through the gaps in child to parent abuse because their child is an adult and not an adolescent or a child. They fall through the gaps that exist in the domestic abuse field because, they are not experiencing abuse from an intimate partner. And then they also fall into through the gaps of elder abuse because some of them are not considered older people. And also they fall through the gaps in safeguarding adults because some of them, did not have, well, most of them actually did not have any care or support needs that would qualify them, for support from safeguarding adults. So they did really confirm, their experiences did really confirm these dichotomies and disjoints that exist between different agencies, between different services, and between different conceptualizations, right, of abuse that we have. And so I think one of the key findings for me from this research was that we really did need, oh, sorry, don't know why I'm cut. I'm trying to move to the next one, but then it just stopped. So I wonder if it's because my battery is low. So I do apologize, and I'm going to quickly plug my laptop in, and I hope that will help explain the, okay, right, so here it is. So yeah, so I think one of the key findings for me really from this research was that we need to have a more interconnected, a more long-term understanding of child to parent abuse that, you know, that goes beyond the age of the child and also the age of the parent. That really takes into account a lot of these, you know, experiences that go on over the life course. And I think what Jane was saying at the beginning of the event is exactly that. You know, CAPVA, you know, offers services to up to 25, but of course we know.
Yeah, so I think what I was saying before I got booted out of Zoom because of my battery was that we do really need a more interconnected and a more life course and long-term, you know, understanding of child to parent abuse, because the experiences of mothers that, you know, that talked to me showed that there was no cutoff point, in terms of the age of the children or their age, really, as opposed to what services would often try to fit them in. All right, hold on. And now, why are you not moving on? Let me see. Okay, so that was really the key, you know, the key finding, overarching, I would say, finding for me. Now, in terms of the dynamics of abuse, it was really interesting to see how mother, you know, and again here, Mercy, she was fantastic because she had a lot of these phrases, you know, these images. She's an artist, and so she was very much visual in her language, in the way she described her experiences, and she had this really interesting phrase, you know, everyday misery, to describe her life, really, to describe the abuse, and it was in very specifically in the context of talking about, you know, calling the police and getting help, etc. And, you know, when would she call the police or not? And what she was saying is that, you know, how do you call the police? To report everyday misery, you know, to report the fact that it's just an ongoing thing. You can't call the police, you know, every time your son basically spills orange juice over your laptop, knowing that you're working and that is your main tool for work, you know. How do you call the police when your son, you know, shouts at you and calls you, you know, like all these like terrible words every day? I mean, you're not going to call the police for that, are you? And so that, again, was a really good illustration of the experiences of my mother's, you know, because every day there was something different every day, but everything, you know, everything added up. Taken on its own, it certainly wasn't enough for them to get any sort of help from anyone, but like together, they formed this daily reality of, you know, of abuse. And this abuse, this everyday misery took on different forms, which were in some ways quite reminiscent, I would say, of intimate partner violence dynamics. We certainly had, you know, examples of coercive controlling behavior by their adult children. That we had a lot of verbal aggression, and we also had, you know, quite, you know, a lot of intimidation. And I think the intimidation, which we know is a huge part of, you know, how coercive control works and how abuse works, you know, in an intimate partner relationship, was also at play for a few of these mothers. And here I am also going to show you some quotes from these mothers. So here, Lizzie, her son was 24 at the time of the interview, talks about her son, Andy. He wants me to himself, right? And that way he can abuse me, he can be violent with me, he can control me. And, you know, if we didn't know about the nature of the relationship, we just see this quote, we could think that it was about a partner. And, and one mother did actually mention on several occasions that it was like living with an abusive partner, except that it was your child. And I think that was really quite interesting. So here again, coming back to Mercy, saying that, he'd be expecting me to drive him to work while calling me stupid fucking cunt and shouting and threatening. And I do apologize for, for the language that I'm going to have to use here, because it's really what he told me. And so I just wanted to keep it, because Mercy in particular, again, as a very artistic, well-educated woman, she found the verbal aggression particularly hard to take. And different mothers had different experiences, and they had different thresholds, so to speak. But for Mercy, the verbal aggression, it was the verbal aggression that really got to her. It was the constant swearing, the constant calling her names, and really belittling her, that she found so destroying, and yes, so she used, she reported these things that her son said to her, and for her it was really hard. It was actually the bit that made it the hardest, almost, but it's also the bit that made it really hard for her to get help, because what are you going to say to the police? That he calls me a stupid fucking cunt and shouts and threatens me on the way to school, so yeah, so I think it was quite poignant when Mercy talked about it. And here we have an example of intimidation from Joan, whose son was a a proper adult already when we had the interview, although his sort of problematic, would say, challenging behavior has started when he was a teenager, 13 or 14. So here he was getting knives from the drawer and threatening me with knives, and he done that a few times. And the knives bit was really, really funny, because he would do that. Like, I think there was one occasion where he just took out his knife and was just like sharpening it. And Joan, and at the time, Joan was with a friend. And her friend just found it a bit odd, like, oh, what is he sharpening his knife for? And Joan actually said to her, well, he's doing that for me. And again, just very much like in intimate partner relationships, we have these gestures that might just be considered odd, or weird, or just unusual by observers. And for the people who live in that situation, they know exactly what that means, really. And of course, there unfortunately would also be quite a lot of examples of physical violence and violence against the home, or criminal damage. And I think this was one area where I don't know, and I don't know whether or not it would be the same for for a lot of the parents that you support. So I would be very interested in hearing more about your experience. But the mothers who talked to me talked a lot about the attacks that their children made against the home, as both very, very literal, very physical, very like material, and quite symbolic as well, because that was the place that they had, basically that they had, that their children had grown up. Okay, so it was both a haven for the mothers, but also, it symbolized the life that they had together with their children, the life that their children had had in that home. And for that place, with such symbolic importance, to be damaged in that way, it was really hard. It was really hard for a lot of moms. And here, in an example of a mother, Kate, who was experiencing abuse from her daughter, actually, who was 21 at the time of the interview. She would have me up against the wall by my throat, a lot of examples of physical violence in Kate's case, and quite extreme violence, which had started when her daughter was 11 or 12, really, so a long time, and at the time of the interview, Kate had just been recently estranged from her daughter, although she had no idea how long that would last, because her daughter had started, contacting her again and asking her if she could go home. And Kate really did not want to do that because she really wanted to have a break, but it was really, really killing her. And so, yes, so, it was very much up in the air, in terms of in terms of the research itself. We had no idea whether Kate's daughter would be back in the home, but very, very a lot of violence. And here Clara talking about her daughter, breaking stuff, slamming doors, pulling doors off hinges, just smashing mirrors, anything at all. And she talked about giving up on the house because her daughter just smashed and broke everything. And so, again, a lot of these women, these mothers, were house proud. They were very proud of their homes and they loved the homes. And so these attacks against the home were really just also quite heartbreaking for them, because they could not have they could not have the home that they really wanted. They could not live in the way that they wanted. And I guess, it would not be very different to how survivors of intimate partner violence experience their home, because it's no longer the safe haven that they would like it to be. But there was something a little bit more poignant, I think, because it's very much this idea of the home is very much linked to the maternal experience, isn't it? And so for that experience to be quite shattered physically, literally, is really quite difficult for mothers. And here you have, this sort of this combination, this accumulation of both criminal damage and attacks against the home and physical violence in the case of Kate, where her daughter went after her with a big bit of wood and smashing through the bathroom door to get to her. And, and I just think living in a situation like that, in that situation of everyday misery, where at any point you could be, physically attacked, and you could have your home smashed. It is an unspeakable experience, and it is all the more unspeakable because of the relationship that they had, because they knew that if they were to call the police, then their children would be arrested, and the rest of it. So and I think this area was where it just felt much more strongly, for much more heartbreaking for mothers when they talked about it. But of course, there were many ways in which these mothers' experiences were really, really different from the experiences of intimate partner violence. And I think that really came through in the caring burden, that these mothers experienced with their children. And so this is where, it was a whole spectrum, where they had to do household chores on their own without any support, not only without any support from their children, but really also against the backdrop of their children sabotaging them, because they would purposefully mess up the house, and they would just have to clean everything up. The cleaning, I clean and tidy up, and after an hour it's all messy. And Alessandra is very, very proud of her home. She's actually a tidy, a minimalist woman, so to speak. She loves things to be as they are in the house, and she had no option. Like she just hated it. She hated the living arrangement. She hated the living space. She hated the house because it was just so messy, because she could never get any break from her, from the cleaning, basically. And so, so it ranged from these tiny details, like household chores, no abuse there, we would say, but, certainly a lot of exploitation, to offering that financial and practical support, to their children. Here, Kate talking about her daughter needing money because she would run out of money every time she has an argument with someone, every time she would go out and then not plan her route home and call me at 2 o'clock in the morning, every single thing. So like being that person that plans and that assumes a lot of responsibilities for their children.
Surely he should be.
Oh, sorry. Hello? Okay.
Sorry, Thien, I just put somebody on mute. I think they'd come off mute by mistake.
All right, yeah. And, so offering that constant, financial and practical support to their children. And Kate also talked about how she would help her daughter, do her CV and of course, in a healthy, relationship, mother-child relationship, helping your daughter do her CV, or, giving your daughter tips on how to manage her money, that would obviously not be a problem at all. But when you take all of this in the context, the wider context of abusive, behavior, verbal aggression, criminal damage, attacks against, intimidation, that could become quite a lot. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have downright financial exploitation, and abuse, where, again, here, Joan talking about her son literally draining her, and her getting into so much debt, having a credit card and having to use the credit card a lot, but for foods and things like that, because she just couldn't keep on going, because she had, because she gave a lot of her money to her son, who stopped working and, stayed home and had no, really other sources of support. And so I think it is in this area that we see how the caring burden is at play, and how it is very specific to, parents, but I would say to mothers, because these were either single parents or cohabiting, I would say, in a relationship, but somehow they would be the only people, they would be only the people taking care of the house. So there's something there wider, obviously, going on. We know about, the gender inequalities in our society, the fact that somehow it is still mothers that assume this caring burden, and the wife, father remain obviously completely absent, and we know about these problems that also exist in, in child protection and in domestic abuse, etc. But I think what was quite interesting is that a lot of the domestic homicide reviews that have been, analyzed, when it is, adult children who killed their parents, one thing that had come out had been the fact that, oh yes, and I obviously these children would be experiencing quite a lot of mental health issues and problematic substance use, which we know, from the domestic homicide reviews and from the domestic homicide data by the Domestic Homicide Project. So these are, these in a way were not new. But one thing I think that domestic homicide reviews had really highlighted is that when it comes to parents and support and their adult children, the economic abuse aspect of the abuse really got missed in many of these cases, And we are talking a lot more about economic abuse, with the Domestic Abuse Act, and with our, a better understanding really of how economic abuse works in intimate partner violence. I think we have a better understanding, a better awareness. But when it comes to adult child to parent abuse, not that we don't understand the dynamics of economic abuse, but those dynamics are often masked or minimized or overlooked by this caring burden, right, that parents assume. And so when parents, present themselves with or without their children, or in the role of support for their children, the economic abuse gets missed because it is often subsumed and assumed within this role that they have of caring for their, for their children. So I think it was quite interesting to see that there were different elements of this caring burden that would really make up the whole spectrum of economic abuse that would have been totally, I think, would have been totally missed had these mothers, gone to a support service and talked about these different things. Really. And again, this is what I call the caring burden, that this is what researchers and literature calls caring burden. But these mothers really did not use that word. That's the thing. They did not talk about the caring burden. They did not talk about any burden whatsoever. They talked about things that, exhausted them. They talked about things that really made them tired and depressed and anxious and, just really feeling like there was no way out because of all of these things that they had to do for their children, because of all of this, abuse and exploitation, about all of these chores, but they did not talk about the caring burden. So again, I think that is very interesting. They, there was this sort of assumption that as mothers, that was what they had to do, that was what they were ready, prepared to do. But at the same time, there was no other option because no one else was there. So, yeah. And one thing that I think that this is, for me, was really interesting from listening to mothers, this is what I call the triple stigma of parent abuse, which was based on the double stigma of parent abuse that Amanda Holt had come up with. So when Amanda Holt talks about parent abuse, she talks about the double stigma of being, right, a victim of domestic abuse, because it is a stigma, but also of parenting a problematic child. And this double stigma makes it even harder for a victim of parent abuse, for a parent to seek help and get the help that they need. And from the accounts of mothers who talked to me, I felt that they suffered from a triple stigma. In addition to the stigma, to the stigma of being a victim of domestic abuse and parenting an abusive, problematic, child, a wayward child, a child that is not a good citizen of society, they also suffered the stigma of being spoiled mothers, of being bad mothers. And they felt that their whole identities as mothers were bad. They were spoiled. They were no longer, they were ruined, so to speak. And here I really want to share with you something that, Joan said, which I found so sort of mind-bendingly, interesting, because she said, I just wish to God that it wasn't me he hated, which is fair enough. But then she says, it just feels like, and sorry, this is what she said. I just feels like, so mistake there. I just feels like I'm a bad mom, because it was happening. I feel as if I've let him down. So not only does Joan suffer, right, the pain of being a victim of abuse from her own child, from her own son, she is blaming herself for being a bad mother because her son is abusing her, if that makes sense. And I think, that, like, those different layers of self-blame really speak to this idea that, that your whole identity as a mother is now ruined because because your child is, has turned against you. Your child is abusing you. And because of that, it is as though you have failed as a mother. It is as though you have failed your child because they are abusing you. You must have done something so terrible. You must have failed so miserably that even your own child turned himself or herself against you. And that is, it really stayed with me, these accounts of spoiled motherhood, these accounts of spoiled maternal identity, spoiled mothers of being bad mothers, that, that it inspired the title of my thesis. Really, it ruined me being a mother. So the abuse ruins their experience of being mothers to other children, of enjoying, that maternal relationship, but also their whole identity as mothers, because for some reason they blame themselves for having failed their children because their children have turned against them. So it's, and here is something that Clara talked about. She says that it's like an elastic band. She described the relationship that she had with her daughter because of the abuse, like an elastic band that is constantly stretching to the point of breaking. And I think that's the thing. It never fully breaks, really, because it's it's always there. That bond is always there. It never fully breaks, but then it is stretched, it is tested to its limit with this abuse. And alongside, this abuse, what they experience is a lot of ambivalence, a lot of hate, a lot of love, a lot of suffering towards their children, and some of them talked about the, feeling guilty for actually not knowing really if they do love their children at all. But then, of course, they did love their children, etc. So there was a lot of internal struggles going on. There was a lot of elasticity that was happening in this relationship, which I think is very, very different, to an intimate partner relationship. Of course, that stretching and that elasticity would be there, but with your child, it is completely different, and you are constantly tested, right? You're constantly stretched to your limit. How far can you go, really? And when does that bond actually break? And the experiences of these mothers show that this bond never fully breaks, and that is why it is so difficult, because it doesn't break. That's why it is so hard to separate, to move on, to kick them out, or to just get an injunction, or call the police and get them prosecuted, etc., because of this link, because of this bond. So when and that helped explain why, when mothers did seek help, or certainly the mothers that took part in the research, when they did seek help, first of all, it was for their children. Rightly or wrongly, it was for their children that they primarily sought help. But even then, or even when they sought help for them, for themselves, they came up against this, I guess, triple whammy of dismissal or indifference, of lack of awareness or understanding, or mother blame. And I think all of this is quite familiar with with us who work in this field. There is, the parent blame discourse that exists when parents seek help for, younger children, is certainly something that we, that we have identified a lot. But even, but when these mothers seek help for their adult children, actually the blame is even perhaps more exacerbated because these are adult children. So in a way, they should be able to let go of them. You know, they should be able to get help. They should be able to get that injunction. They should be able to get that, you know, kick them out and change the locks, etc. Because they are adults. They no longer have any responsibility towards them. Then why do they hold on? So there was this idea very much that for mothers, you know, they were enabling, so to speak, the abuse. They were enabling their children's behavior because they refused, you know, to get the typical options of help that would be offered to a victim of domestic abuse, right? Separating, you know, getting an order, calling the police, etc., etc. And, you know, so here just to illustrate some of these problems that mothers experienced. I went to the doctors repeatedly. No one did anything. No one said anything. I tried finding social services, and this was when, you know, her daughter was still a very young child. I tried finding social services, and I remember the woman saying to me, "You're her mother, do your job." There was no advice, there was no support, there was nothing. Now, you know, her daughter being 21 at the time of the interview, we would hope, right, that that experience that Kate had would have been quite a long time ago and things would have moved on quite a bit, except that we know that things, you know, haven't always moved on like that, because we still have this kind of discourse. We still have, you know, this kind of message given to parents, to mothers, when they do get help, right, with their very, you know, young or adolescent children. And Alessandra, because her child, right, is an adult, she says, well, professionals tell me it's up to you. You get the injunction. It is your choice. It's up to you. We are here to help you. We are not going to work with your daughter. So it's really up to you. And it just doesn't work for Alexandra. And I reckon it didn't work for, you know, it doesn't work for a lot of parents either. So what comes up really is this sense of invisibility, you know, of not being heard, of not being seen, of not being given any sort of space where they could really tell their stories and get a different kind of, you know, of message. So here Ilsa is an interesting one because she was very much, you know, she was very much one of these parents who wanted support for her son and her son only. She didn't need anything, you know, again, rightly or wrongly, you might say, but that was very much her perspective. And she really wanted to work with the support services that were, you know, working with him alongside them, you know, in collaboration, because she was a carer of her son, and her son had substance misuse issues. He was working with youth services and then substance misuse services. And she really wanted to work with them to support him. So she said, what are you guys doing? You know, let me know so that I can be in the loop, so that I can also support him. And they said to her, no, it's private. And her experience is that, well, it's private for them, but not for her, because he lives at her place and she gets to see everything. And she doesn't know what they are doing, that she could also, you know, that she could also maybe support her son with. What is the problem to be talking to us? And I think this is, you know, a huge problem that has been identified by parents and carers of, you know, service users of substance misuse and mental health services. And it's also been a huge problem that has been identified in countless domestic homicide reviews, where we have, you know, parents and carers and family members of mental health and substance use service users or patients sidelined every time. You know, they are relied upon to be the support network for these patients, but they are not taken into account when any support plan or any risk assessment take place. And so there's this huge invisibility, even when, you know, the parents are there and really want the support and really want to work with agencies. So in terms of, what effective service and support looks like for mothers, and I'm going to hopefully finish within the next 10 minutes so we have some time to talk and discuss, etc. I think, awareness really, that is an important thing, a very important thing for parents, for mothers, people understanding the dynamic of this and how difficult it is. So, yeah, so I think awareness of what the abuse might look like, but also how parents may experience it very differently, right, to intimate partners. AVA, the AVA model, ask, validate, and act, that we use so much in intimate partner violence to train professionals, to encourage professionals, to respond to domestic abuse. It is also something that, adult to parent abuse victims really, really want. And Stella is one where, she was a very interesting case, because she experienced abuse from her son as an adult. So, he had been, she would say, challenging a little bit. Their relationship had been difficult when he was younger, but nothing, nothing abusive, so to speak, until he, wanted her to, he moved in with her because he lost his tenancy. So he moved in with her and he wanted her to put his name on the tenancy. And when she refused, that's when the abuse started. So, so she would be we would say a typical domestic abuse case, right? So she went to her GP to talk to her GP, and her GP started the ball rolling. And her GP then contacted the local CAPVA service, which really supported her. But Stella was in a very different place, you see. She was quite clear at that point when she reached the support service that she didn't want her son to be staying in her flat anymore. It was very clear that she wanted him out. And so for someone maybe like Stella, who knew that this was what she wanted, even though it was difficult, don't get me wrong, she talked about the fact that it was killing her, to actually go to court and get that, to report him, go to court and get that non-molestation order against him. It was killing her inside, and she was still living with the impact of that decision. And I think she experienced a lot of guilt, a lot of shame for having kicked her son out. But, but that's really something that that we know that a lot of victims of domestic abuse grapple with. But here in this case, she was in crisis. She wanted him out, and the CAPVA service did a really great job at offering her that crisis intervention. But that sort of crisis intervention may not be what other parents experience, and certainly it was not the case for a lot of the other mothers that that were in the research. I think trauma-informed, we talk a lot about trauma-informed service and support, etc. But but I think what was really interesting about this was when Lizzie talked about her son Andy. He had, he suffered, he grappled with a lot of substance misuse issues. He was very abusive to her, and we know that that is completely independent, right, of the substance abuse. But she recognized that he had gone through experienced a lot of losses in his life, really huge, important, losses in his young life, in some key people that he had been very close to, his granddad and then his father. And these losses had an impact on his behavior, certainly on his addiction. And so she felt that when an addiction service deals with, Andy, they should really try to find out what the trauma is. In the same way, she really wanted, for someone to talk to her and find out what her trauma is. Unfortunately, that service was absolutely not available for her at all. I think unsurprisingly, against the backdrop of, lack of communication, lack of understanding, and mother blaming and invisibility that mothers experienced. What they really wanted was better communication, better consultation, better collaboration. Again, here, Ilse talking about the absurdity of a service working with her son who lives at her home and who never even bothered talking to her. She talked about this, she described a home visit that the service did for her son. And they just came in, they saw her sitting at the kitchen table, and they just said hello to her, and that was it. They said hello, they came into her son's room, they did whatever they did with him, and then they left. They did not even stop to talk to her. And she, and she described that situation, and she said, like, it's for her, it's incomprehensible because he lives at her place and she is there to support him. And they did not even have the courtesy to stop and talk to her at all, so. And I think that this absurdity of that situation really highlights a lot of the need, the yearning that a lot of, these mothers have for inclusion and communication. Long-term and flexible support, really that is a key, a key point. And here, Ilse also, accessed some CAPVA support, which, she found quite helpful, really. And then the CAPVA service called her to ask if she needed some other type of support. And she said, I don't know, because really she didn't. And then they said, well, if you didn't need any more support, then we would close the file, right? Closing the file. And what Ilse talked about was the fear of having her file closed, of having her case closed, because she didn't know what the situation was going to be like. But then they ended up closing the file, right? Because, well, she was no longer high risk. He was getting support. There's nothing they couldn't do. There was nothing they could do, for her son. So for her, because she didn't need anything else, they had to close the file. So, long-term and flexible support, not just for the children, but certainly for the parents. And I really don't think that is what the CAPVA service is designed for. I mean, it's not the fault of the CAPVA service. We just need to have better funding, to have better service provision for these victims, really, because it's certainly not going to be crisis intervention at all. And then here, I thought that it would be quite interesting to share with you a quote from, this is what a mother said, Kate. This is what Kate said. Society needs to deal with the root cause, not the symptom. And what is that root cause? It is not always, abuse. It is not always intimate partner abuse that these children grew up witnessing at all, as we would think. But it is but it is certainly one way or another a type of, gender inequality and gendered violence that really, really forces these mothers to be the primary carers of their children, to be the default support network that professionals send their children back to when they are completely ignored and completely overlooked by the same professionals, right? So there is something there that we really need to talk about in terms of how society deals with these issues of parent blaming, but really also, primarily mother blaming. How young boys, and young girls are taught about relationships, including, the relationships that they see with their parents. In the case of Kate, she had experienced horrendous intimate partner violence from her partner and the father of her children. They had gone into refuge, they had gone into temporary accommodation, and, basically anything you could think of in terms of coercive control, in terms of post-separation, high risk, you name it, and the role of the family, courts, abuse through the children, contact with the children, etc. You name it, you get it in the, in Kate's case. But only her second daughter really became abusive. Her her elder daughter experienced all of this horrendousness and had to go through years of, of therapy, and was still very much affected by it, but she was not abusive. So, it is much, when we talk about the root cause, it's very much more than just, oh yes, intimate partner violence, witnessing causes these children to be abusive. Of course not. But what Kate was talking about there is the fact that we are still letting men, abusive men, absent fathers and abusive fathers off the hook. We are still holding women, mothers, to account, and we're still responsibilizing them instead of dealing with the problem of that is caused by men. And of course there is the wider problem of gender inequalities, of of gendered, I guess, treatment of women and of mothers that we really have to rethink in terms of how children's services, for instance, deal with child protection issues, etc. So certainly awareness raising and training, especially support for parents and mothers alongside domestic abuse support services, gender informed, right, understanding, service provision and coordinated community response, and above all, a really interconnected long-term understanding of child to parent abuse within the wider context of violence against women, because if you look at a lot of the cases of of child to parent abuse, there will be some examples of abusive or certainly absent fathers, or problematic men in the background there. And it's also maybe not a coincidence that the majority of adult children who are abusive are sons who are abusive to mothers. So what does that say about our society, about the society that we still live in? So how do we combat child to parent abuse if we don't deal with the problems of male violence against women and gendered inequality, right? So so again, that really, we have to link up between domestic abuse, child protection, adult safeguarding. We need to talk to one another and really connect the dots, and not just think about the people that we work with as, clearly, neatly divided, separated individuals that will somehow stop experiencing, abuse once they leave the doors of our services, really. So yes, so that is it from me. The slides will be shared with you after the event in PDF, and you will have my contact details there. But yes, I'm certainly looking forward to all of the questions and all of the discussion, because I'm sure I have more to learn from you based on what you are doing on the ground than what I did a few years ago now. So I'm going to stop sharing my slide.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Thien Trang. I mean, that just so interesting. And so one of the questions that we had sort of a little while ago into it was, is there any actual research that you know of that links this behaviour from adolescents or primary age children and then going on to be adult perpetrators of domestic violence, not just towards their parents, but maybe in other intimate relationships?
Well, that's the thing. There is, there is not really any research. So when we look at child to parent abuse research, it's very much focused on children, younger children and adolescents. And then and then there's not research at all on adult child to parent abuse. Well, there's a bit more now. So there's certainly not research that makes that whole linkage. However, from my literature review, from my knowledge, oh my God, I have forgotten her name now, but there is a really, I need to find her name, but she's American. You may actually know her, Judith Smith. I don't know if you know her name, but she's done, I mean, her field of research was elder abuse actually, and gerontology. But she did this, again, she did this research really, this is what we call, accidental evidence or accidental research, where she talked to older mothers about their experience of mothering difficult adult children. And that was when she, when she saw that actually a lot of them had experienced that, those difficult experiences before. So I think, so I think that would be a researcher that I would recommend. She, what was the book that she published last year now? I need to find the name and get back to you. Otherwise, there is a piece of research. It is quite old now because it's from 2008. By Stewart et al. In Australia. So, they looked at, again, experiences of mothers, had nothing to do with abuse. It was actually experiences of mothers caring for their children, I think. And it just so happened that abuse became a theme that, that came up among the stories that these mothers told. And so because of the age groups that they were looking at, they were able to actually form, more of a life course, a view of the abuse. But honestly, I don't know of any specific piece of research that, follows the children, abusive children from, abusive children, children who use abusive behaviors from their adolescence over the life course. That would be fantastic research.
It's a bit of a gap, I think. I think somebody called Peter might have started something up in Manchester, but I'm not too sure about it. So Elizabeth, her question was, with the coercive control, are there cases where the abusive child has influenced siblings to abuse too?
Let me see. So interest, I mean, again, I have no doubt that would, that would be an experience of quite a lot of parents and a lot of mothers. But the mothers who took part in my research, interestingly enough, their other children, I mean, perhaps that was one of the only things that saved them from, one of them did talk about the fact that the only reason why they felt comforted in the knowledge that maybe it had nothing to do with their parenting was because their other children were okay. And so none of the children in the research had influenced negatively their siblings so that their siblings would be abusive as well. So that was really interesting. And actually, it was one of the things that, gave these mothers a sanity, so to speak, because they said, well, had it not been for my other children who were actually okay and non-abusive, then I would have thought that it was completely my fault, that I definitely did something very, very wrong as a mother.
And I certainly know that families have said to us, and I'm sure, people here would agree that certainly children that have come from trauma can re-trigger their trauma with their siblings, which can cause siblings to, all behave in a way that can be really challenging and harmful and violent.
Yes.
Because triggering the trauma.